Is that Felix asking to come inside? Get in the house, kitty. I hope he learned his lesson. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I have a recipe from What's for Dessert that is a beautiful late spring, early summer baking recipe. It's my rhubarb and raspberry shortcakes. So instead of the classic strawberry, which I still love, I'm using rhubarb, one of my favorite baking fruits, technically a vegetable, but close enough, plus raspberries. You could use any summer or spring fruit you like. Here it's still even a little bit early for strawberries, so this is a great kind of stand-in once that rhubarb comes into season. So I love the classic strawberry, but here I'm using rhubarb. It's not quite strawberry season yet, adding a little bit of raspberries. You could use any spring or summer fruit, so it's super flexible. The shortcake recipe itself is like a great go-to, and I'm gonna show you how to make it. So it looks like a lot of ingredients. It's not really, because I have a couple ingredients in different places. I have over here my fruit, which I'm going to poach. So rhubarb is almost never eaten raw. I mean, you can, but it's really crunchy. So we want to poach it to soften it and sweeten it a little bit. So I have my raspberries and rhubarb. Then over here, I have my shortcake ingredients, flour, some cream, butter, of course. And then here is my assembly ingredients. So when we go to assemble the shortcakes, I make some whipped cream, like a little mascarpone, put it all together. I put poppy seeds on top. So that's what you see here. Just to run through the ingredients really quick, I have a little bit of salt, some white wine. You could use rosé. Don't use like an expensive wine. Use like something for cooking. An orange, I'm gonna use the zest to go into the shortcakes and the juice for poaching my rhubarb. Rhubarb and orange is a great combo. Some vanilla extract. This is sugar for the poaching liquid. 12 ounces of trimmed rhubarb stalks. 6 ounces raspberries. For assembling the shortcakes, I have some demerara sugar, poppy seeds, heavy cream, mascarpone cheese. And for making the actual shortcake dough, I'm using cake flour. I'll talk about why. More heavy cream, more sugar, more salt, some baking powder, and of course, butter. Okay, in terms of special equipment, this is a pretty like low-tech recipe. You do a lot of it by hand, but you do need a couple things. And I have it behind me because I ran out of counter space. I have a box grater. It's a great technique that uses a box grater for incorporating the butter. A couple bowls. You'll need a rolling pin for the shortcakes and a saucepan for poaching the rhubarb. So before I show you my shortcake recipe, I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. Kerrygold is the maker of superior quality salted and unsalted butter. All of the milk comes from cows that feed on green pastures and small family farms in Ireland. I love Kerrygold for the creamy flavor, the soft texture. It's something that I use in all of my baking, but also just to spread on toast in the morning. So if you've seen previous episodes of Dessert Person, you've probably seen it in my fridge. I'm always pulling it out, and it makes just like the most buttery crusts and flaky pastry. I'm gonna be using it today in my shortcakes, which makes them so flaky and light, and it really just is the best butter around, and I've tested all of the nationally available brands. Kerrygold is my pick, so for more on Kerrygold, check out the link below. And now let's get back into the recipe. The first thing I'm gonna do is poach my rhubarb and make my fruit mixture. So this poaching liquid could be as simple as just water and sugar. I like to flavor it a little bit, and anytime I'm poaching a fruit, I like to actually use the poaching liquid because there is flavor that is imparted to the liquid from the fruit that you're cooking. So I don't want to waste any of that. Now the poaching liquid has a little bit of orange juice in it, and I have one orange, but the zest goes into the shortcakes. So before I actually do anything, I'm just gonna take a little bit of the zest and the sugar for the shortcake, mix that together. It's just a lot easier to take the zest off before you juice it. I think it's like a teaspoon or so. So this is good because the first step will already be done for my shortcakes. And I'm eyeballing a teaspoon. You could use lemon zest, that's great too. But I just really like the combination of rhubarb and orange. Okay. So one thing I always do when I'm incorporating zest into anything is I mix it with the sugar and kind of massage it, just basically rubbing it between my fingertips. It's so fragrant, it smells so orangey, it brings out all the oils and aromas. And what I always say is to continue to mix it until it looks like wet sand. So there we are. Now this can go back over here with my other shortcake ingredients. So now my poaching liquid. I have a large saucepan, medium works. I'm gonna start by combining my liquid ingredients. So I have a cup of white wine. You can omit the wine if you prefer to use something with no alcohol, you could use like a little bit of apple juice, or you could just substitute water. Then I'm gonna add a cup of water. So that's gonna go in. Then my cup of sugar. As I said, rhubarb is really, really tart, so it benefits from a decent amount of sugar. One thing I love about poaching rhubarb is it turns the poaching liquid like bright pink. And it's so pretty because I'm gonna reduce that down and use it as like a sauce for the shortcakes, and it's like almost fluorescent at that point. It's so vibrant. Very small pinch of kosher salt. Salt is a flavor enhancer. That's true of sweet and savory. Then some vanilla extract. If you are feeling fancy, you can throw in like half of a whole vanilla bean. You just like split lengthwise. That's great too. Maybe a couple teaspoons. Then I need a half a cup of orange juice. So I'm just gonna juice this. I mean, you could do this with lemon juice. I mean, then you're like adding still tartness, so just make sure that's balanced out with the sugar, but you could use other juices. Very often poaching liquid has a little bit of wine or other alcohol in it. All right, so I think I'm gonna get just about a half a cup of juice out of this orange. Right now, that's a 1/4 cup. I'll do the other half and hopefully get a 1/4 cup. Okay, so I need to supplement. Well, let's see if I can still get something out of here. I was trying not to use this orange, which I zested and has been petrifying in my fruit bowl, but I need more orange juice, so. The weird thing, Harrison and I've talked about this, the weird thing about fruit when you take the zest off and then it sits there, it like weirdly gets more juicy as it sits, so. Good to use this up. It just wasn't camera ready. Okay, so that's a 1/4 cup. So a half cup total. I don't care if a little bit of pulp gets in there. It's no big deal. So I want to get my poaching liquid onto the heat so that I can get the mixture warming and the sugar dissolving. And while that's warming up, I'm just going to have it on like medium heat. I'm going to slice my rhubarb and I'll stir it occasionally. Okay. So my rhubarb. When I was at the store, and the rhubarb is looking great right now, and you can usually get rhubarb all the way, depends on, oh, no. Depends on, oh, geez, kidding. So this is my rhubarb. This is 12 ounces trimmed. So often there's like the base end of the stalk, like where it meets the plant in the ground, and then the leafy end. So I trimmed both away. This is 12 ounces. The rhubarb was looking really great in the store. This is like sort of the beginning of rhubarb season. Usually, at least in New York where I am, it's rhubarb season all the way through summer. I'm gonna just trim this. Does that feel like asking to come inside? Oh, I hope he learned his lesson. Get in the house, kitty. Hope you're happy. So when I'm at the grocery store and I'm looking at rhubarb, I always try to go for the darkest color because I like the way it looks the best. And it's gonna give a beautiful color to the dessert. I also look for the really thin stalks, which tend to be a little bit more tender. So these are kind of medium. So what I end up doing for this dessert, because I like the way it looks, is I split the stalks lengthwise. So just cutting them in half the long way. And then I cut them into batons, maybe like 1.5 inches or so. Bite-sized pieces, basically. So, like so. For the thinner stalks, maybe I don't need to do that. And I can just cut them into pieces. The thing you want to keep in mind is that whenever you're cooking anything, you want the pieces to be as sort of equal in terms of dimensions and size as possible, because then they're going to cook more evenly. So that just means splitting the thicker stalks lengthwise, like this one. And then rhubarb needs to be cooked. Raspberries do not, but I do end up adding them to the poaching liquid, and I'll explain sort of when I do that step, because I like them to soften ever so slightly, and I like that they get coated in that liquid. So I have 12 ounces rhubarb, 6 ounces raspberries. The raspberries are just there to like round everything out, add a little bit of a different texture so that it's not all rhubarb, but as I said, this is really a dessert that is more about rhubarb than anything else. Okay, so now I'm gonna go over to the stove with my fruit and just look at my poaching liquid. I just wanna warm this mixture until the sugar is dissolved, so stirring definitely helps that along. The mixture is kind of barely steaming. And I have the heat on medium right now. So I wanna stir until it's dissolved. I still can feel a little bit of granulated sugar in there. So once the sugar is dissolved, I'm gonna add just my rhubarb, because that takes longer to cook. The thing about rhubarb is it needs to be cooked, but it also can turn to complete mush extremely easily. So this is going to be a very, very gentle poach. So I'm just adding these pieces. And all I'm doing here is bringing up this mixture just until I see very light bubbling around the edges, barely even a simmer, definitely not a boil. If you boil it, you really risk turning them to mush. So I'm just gonna kind of stand here and keep an eye, but this happens pretty quickly, and then that's it. So the rhubarb is in. It's a really quick poach on the rhubarb because one property of rhubarb is even though it really should be cooked most of the time when you're eating it, it can turn to mush so fast. And it's really important to this dessert that the rhubarb maintains its shape. So the poach is really just like a warm bath almost. So I'm bringing it up right now. It's on barely medium high. And I'm just going to warm it until I start to see very faint bubbling around the edges. Not even really a simmer and definitely not a boil. Boil equals like breaking down the rhubarb, which we don't want. So as soon as I see those bubbles, which will just take a few minutes, I'm gonna bring it back here, add the raspberries to the mixture while it's still warm so they can kind of warm through and soften slightly. And then we're done. That's the poach and the rhubarb. So there's very subtle, gentle bubbling around the sides of the saucepan. I'm gonna take it off the heat. You can see the rhubarb has, I don't want to say it's lost a little bit of its color, but it's like a little more pink than red. When I squeeze it, it has some give to it, and it's softened, but it's not mushy. It still has all of its shape and texture. So this is going to continue to poach gently in this warm mixture. I'm going to add the raspberries now. I just like having the raspberries in there. It softens them slightly. I like that they get coated in that sort of sweetened mixture. So these are going to go in, 6 ounces again, like 1 clamshell at the grocery store. Kind of just stir gently to incorporate. This is going to get set aside. Everything's going to just kind of hang out. The poaching liquid will take on some of the flavor. The rhubarb and the raspberries will kind of continue to like very, very gently cook through. So while that's hanging out over there, I can turn to my shortcake dough. So now on to my shortcake dough, which is really like the meat of this recipe. Shortcakes are really simple. The way that like biscuits and scones are simple. It's basically like flour, a little leavening, some butter, and then your liquid. There's just a couple important points to keep in mind when it comes to technique so that you're guaranteed something that's like light and flaky and not dense and heavy, which you do not want. So the only change that I'm making to this recipe, which is in the book, is that I'm actually using cake flour instead of all-purpose. It was important to me when I developed What's for Dessert to call for like as few different types of flour as possible because everyone has all-purpose at home, so that was what I wanted to use like 99% of the time. But if you have cake flour, I do recommend using it in this recipe because it does make a very, very light, tender shortcake. So again, you can use all-purpose. The recipe works, it was made to work with all-purpose. But cake flour is just like a little kind of extra like help that you can give yourself if you have it at home. So I have cake flour. I'm going to make everything in this one bowl. Then I have that mixture of my zest and that half cup of sugar. So that's going to go in. Again, you can use lemon zest if you prefer that. Okay. Then I'm going to add a little bit of kosher salt. Season everything. So I'm using, this is my leavener. This is 4 teaspoons of baking powder. If you've made buttermilk biscuits in the past, you've probably also added baking soda. Baking soda is used in the presence of something really acidic like buttermilk, but I'm not using buttermilk, I'm using heavy cream. So this recipe kind of takes the best of both worlds from like a buttermilk biscuit, which has butter in it, and a cream biscuit, which is just straight cream. So you get this kind of flakiness from adding butter with this incredible tenderness that you get from using heavy cream because heavy cream has so much butter fat in it. What ends up happening is it just like inhibits gluten formation even further and it just makes something really, really tender. So I have all my dry ingredients in here. I'm going to whisk this together. Now, an important step that you're going to have to do ahead is to freeze your butter. So this is my butter. It's 12 tablespoons or 1.5 sticks, 5 ounces, and it's frozen. I froze it last night. So you want fully frozen butter for this recipe. So just plan ahead accordingly. Give it at least a few hours in the freezer to firm up. And I have my box grater. So I'm going to show you this great technique for making really, really flaky pastry of all different kinds. I want it frozen because I'm going to grate this. So I want the texture to be hard. And I'm going to get shreds like you would get of like grating cheddar. So I'm going to start with my butter. And I'm going to toss it in the flour to coat it because the flour is going to make it easier for me to grip. And it's also going to help the shreds separate as I grate it. Keep in mind that the heat from your hands is going to warm up the butter, so you want to work fast. You want to work fast so that your hands don't warm it, and you want to work fast so that the butter itself just doesn't have a chance to get warm in the dough. So you can see that I'm just continuing to coat it in a little flour, which helps. I like this technique because it's such a fast way to incorporate the butter, and the butter stays really cold. So cold ingredients, cold butter and cold dairy, whether it's buttermilk or cream in this case, are so important to the tenderness and the final texture of the shortcake. This is a way of incorporating the butter really fast, making sure the butter is really cold, and I'm not sitting there letting it warm up by smashing it with my fingertips. So this is the texture of the butter, these little shreds. So I'm going to do the second piece of butter, the full stick. Again, trying to work pretty fast. It would be nice if you did this on like a not totally scorching day so that your kitchen isn't 1,000 degrees. So just coating this in flour, putting that box grater right inside the bowl. This is already warming up a little bit, this butter, but that's okay. Just want to work fast. Once you get down to like the little tiny nub, you want to be really careful about grating your fingertips and or your knuckles, so it's okay to just throw that last little tiny piece in. Grated my knuckles many times. Okay, so that last little bit is going to go in, and all my little shreds. Make sure you like kind of clean out the inside of your box grater. So now I have my butter incorporated. I just want to go ahead with my fingertips, really lightly, light touch, and toss everything together. And really what I want to do is get all of the shreds, each individual little piece, coated in flour. This looks great. When I touch it, it's really cold. If you're working under challenging conditions because it's really hot in your kitchen, you can freeze the flour. It's actually like a great step to do. When you're throwing in the butter, throw in the flour along with it. Keep everything cold. Okay, so now I'm going to incorporate my heavy cream. The heavy cream is also chilled, so make sure you keep that in the fridge right up until the point where you need it. Just go ahead and use the same spoon. So you can see I made a little well in the center of the ingredients. I'm going to pour in my heavy cream. I have 1.5 cups. By the way, in What's for Dessert, this is the exact same recipe for drop biscuits. Like if you're making a cobbler, this is what I put on top of my peach cobbler. However, if you're making drop biscuits, you add an extra 1/2 cup of cream, just FYI. But for biscuits, which hold their shape a little bit more, 1.5 cups is plenty. So now I'm going to start to incorporate the dry ingredients and mix everything together. I don't like to do this step with my hands because you end up touching the liquid. You end up sort of like dipping your fingers in the liquid and then touching the flour, and all it does is get your hands like really, really coated, which makes it sort of hard to work with. So you can see that it makes this kind of really shaggy dough. And now one thing that you really want to do is try to distribute that liquid as evenly as possible. So you don't want like really dry areas of biscuits. This is something way back when I had Natasha Pickowicz on the channel and we made scones together. Check out that episode. She used this technique, which I really like. You know, you have this mixture of like wet clumps and dry unincorporated bits. And if you kind of break up the wet bits and then let the mixture kind of run through your hands, you end up incorporating a lot of those dry parts. So that's just kind of what I'm doing here.
Salad fingers.
Salad fingers, right. Such a good visual. So like here's like a nice wet clump. If you break that up and kind of toss it through, the wet areas pick up some of that loose dry ingredients. Now, again, you want to try to work with some urgency because you don't want things to warm up and you don't want to overwork it. Now, with the cream in there and all the butter and the cake flour, it's really unlikely that you're going to overwork this, but just keep that in mind. So once I have this mixture that really holds together well when I squeeze, like so, I'm going to get it out onto my work surface. Okay, so now what I want to do is start to form my shortcakes. Now, I like to do a couple extra steps, not really surprising given my approach in general. What you could do is you could basically form this, cut your shortcakes, and you're done. But by doing a couple extra steps, you end up with something so incredibly flaky that I think it's really worth it. So what I want to do now is just use my fingers, or my palms and fingertips on the other hand, to flatten this into like a rectangle-ish square. It doesn't really have to be specific as far as dimensions. And actually, let me grab a tool for this. Bench scraper, you got the right answer. So when you use a bench scraper, it can really help you to compact the sides where you might have like sort of looser, floury parts that kind of break off. So you can see it comes together into this really kind of rough looking dough. I'm gonna roll this out into about a 1/2 inch thick slab. If you need to add a little bit of flour, you can. And as I continue to work this, I will need a little bit of extra flour just to prevent sticking. Okay. So squaring off these sides. And now I'm going to use this bench scraper and I'm going to cut it in half lengthwise. Then, also using the bench scraper, I'm going to lift up one side and place it on top of the other. If you have like little loose pieces that come off, just place them on top. So now I'm going to grab some bench flour. I used cake flour in the recipe, but bench flour can be anything. So all-purpose flour is fine. And I'm going to roll it again, but first I'm going to actually get it onto a little bit of a floured surface, because the more that I roll on that first side, the more it's going to really want to stick right where it is. So just kind of lifting this up, moving it over. I like this technique not only because it makes a texture that's really, really flaky, but also because all of these steps of like rolling and stacking and cutting help to further even out the hydration. So you get really consistent texture through all your shortcakes. So I'm going to roll this again into sort of a similar dimension rectangle. So I want this into a rectangle that's about twice as long as it is wide. So that looks good. Now I'm going to cut it in half again, but this time crosswise, not lengthwise. So you see I'm making sort of 2 equal-ish squares. Then that same stacking motion, so this piece is gonna come up, it's gonna sit on top of the one below, press back any pieces. So this stacking is taking all of those little shreds of butter that have now kind of flattened into sheets, and it's doubling the number of sheets that I have. That means that all of those little butter pieces are going to release steam in the oven, sort of separate and give me that flaky texture. So now I have my dough in this nice little packet. I put down a little more flour. And this is what I'm going to roll out to make my final shortcakes. Just a little bit of extra flour on top. So again, as you roll, you can use your scraper to keep nice even sides. And I'm going to roll this out into a square that's about 7 inches on all sides. The dough has a good amount of liquid in it, like it's soft, so you don't have to really, like you could just pat it down with your hands. I find it easier to use a rolling pin because then you're not applying heat, but you could just pat it down if you prefer. So I like that this bench scraper has like a ruler on it, so it helps me know the dimensions.
What if you're at this part and it's just all like breaking apart?
If you're at this part and it's kind of like falling apart on you, it's doubtful that that would happen given the amount of liquid that you've added, unless you somehow mismeasured your heavy cream. More likely is that the dough would feel really soft, actually. So if the dough is feeling really soft and like it's a little warm to the touch, go ahead and refrigerate it. Get it on a sheet tray, stick it in the fridge, maybe even let it hang out in the freezer for like 5 minutes, and then proceed after it cools back down. All right, I think I'm there. It's looking good. So here I have my 7-inch square. I'm now gonna cut my shortcakes. Often you see round shortcakes, that's most common, but I hate scraps and I hate wasting any dough. So if you just cut them into squares, you don't have that problem. So these are gonna be square. So time to cut the shortcakes. I know how I just said how I hate scraps, but I do have a little bit of trim here, so I like to cut around all 4 sides because these areas here at the edges like have been sort of sealed. So you don't really get the same separation and layers if you don't cut that away and expose like a nice clean cut surface. I do cut the bare minimum, which is why I take a lot of care to make sure it's as square as possible. That's like, then you have the least amount of trim. So I just start by shaving off like truly the bare minimum of dough from around the sides. So overall, not a huge amount of dough to sacrifice for the shortcakes. Because I'm cutting them into squares, I don't have that many options for the number that I'm gonna make. I can make like a 2x2 or a 3x3 or a 4x4, etc. I'm gonna go with a 3x3. So it does end up making kind of a weird yield. It's 9, just not like your typical yield, but that's okay. 3x3, so cutting each side into thirds. Just giving myself some guides. Okay. Okay, and these are my shortcakes. I'm gonna get them onto a parchment lined baking sheet. If you've had any amount of sticking, use that scraper to help you lift them up. I love the way that these look. They come out so light. These look great. Now, just to ensure that all of the hard work that you just did to like keep everything cold and to not overwork it and to make all those layers, we want to preserve all of that. So these are going to actually chill before I bake them. I think in the recipe I say to put them in the freezer, which is great. You could also freeze them solid at this point and bake them at your convenience another time, and they can go right in from frozen. So these are going to chill until I'm sure that the dough has had a chance to firm up, and then I'll bake them. So I'll get the oven preheating. In the freezer, that would be like about 15 minutes. I can take these nuts out. Yeah, no big deal. Okay. Oh yeah. So while my shortcakes are chilling, I'm preheating my oven. I just turned it on to 425. So the shortcakes bake pretty hot because I want a nice blast of heat to sort of give them that lift that I want so that they get nice and tall and light. While that's preheating, I'm going to turn back to my fruit mixture and get that ready because I want to reduce the poaching liquid. Obviously, I don't want to reduce the poaching liquid with the fruit in it because then it's just going to overcook. So I'm going to use a slotted spoon to remove the fruit but leave the liquid in the saucepan. So I'm just going to transfer the fruit to a bowl. You can see the raspberries still have all of their shape, but they've just softened nicely. Kind of want to taste a piece of rhubarb. The rhubarb is such an amazing texture. It's like so perfectly soft. And if I just give it a little bit of pressure, it yields so easily, but it's not mushy. See how when I press it, like, will start to kind of come apart, but
Looks a little like imitation crab.
it does look like imitation crab. Oh, it's so good. Really lightly sweet. Like you couldn't eat rhubarb raw really on its own. It's too tart, but it really like absorbs the sweetness from the poaching liquid. It's so delicious. I'm really excited about this. And the smell, like so many floral aromas coming from this poaching liquid. I love it. One thing I like about recipes like this is I've poached rhubarb like probably a dozen times at least. But you don't have to have that much experience cooking rhubarb to follow this recipe and get great results because it's so easy to follow those steps of like dissolve the sugar, add the rhubarb, bring it up to just when you see bubbles and turn it off the heat and let it sit there. And then you're kind of guaranteed like perfectly cooked results every single time. It definitely works best with in-season rhubarb, but that's not even really something you can find out of season. There is an amazing product in the UK. You can't really get it here. I think sometimes fancy restaurants get it here in the US, but it's called forced rhubarb. And it's a really old farming technique done by, I think, just even a handful or fewer farmers in the UK where they grow rhubarb in total darkness. It's incredible. And it's like a very prized, sort of very early spring fruit. Okay. So there's my fruit. Here's my poaching liquid. You can see it's taken on this really beautiful pink color. This pink color is going to intensify as I reduce it and boil off a lot of the water. And it's going to turn into this like beautiful, vibrant, almost fluorescent syrup. It's going to look so pretty over the shortcakes. So this is going to go back on the stove. And I don't really need to watch it. And now you can boil it. Now boiling is good. We want to get rid of and evaporate that moisture. So back on the stove on high, I'll keep an eye on it. And as soon as my oven is preheated, I'm gonna get my shortcakes in the oven. And those only take 20 minutes to bake. This will probably be done when the shortcakes are done. So it won't go more than 20 minutes or so on the stove. It's not that much liquid really to reduce. So turning back to my shortcakes, the oven is still coming up to temp. They've probably been chilling for 10 minutes or so. I'm gonna get together the rest of my ingredients that I need for assembly. So for finishing the shortcakes, I have some poppy seeds. I just love the way that they look, and I love baking with poppy seeds. You don't have to put them on if you don't have them, or you don't feel like getting them, or you don't like them. And then I have some demerara sugar. Any sugar on top I think is really crucial. There's not so much sugar in the shortcakes that it makes them really sweet, so they really benefit from like a crunchy sprinkle of sugar on top. I'm also gonna brush them with heavy cream, which I forgot to set that aside. I do have a little bit more heavy cream, so I'm gonna grab that and a brush, and then as soon as the oven comes up to temp, we'll be ready to put them in. The oven is at 425. I'm gonna pull my now semi-frozen sheet tray of shortcakes out, and we'll get them in the oven. If you did want to make this in advance, you could freeze them solid on the baking sheet, and then you could even take them off the baking sheet and pack them into like a freezer bag, and then just keep them in the freezer, and then put them back on the baking sheet when it's time to bake. But these are going in right now. I have a little bit of extra heavy cream. You only need like a few tablespoons for this. And anytime I'm making biscuits or scones or whatever it is, I do like to brush them with whatever the fat is that I put in to the dough itself. So here I have butter and heavy cream, but it's just easier to use heavy cream. And the heavy cream is great because there's a little bit of natural sugar, which encourages browning. Plus there's the fat, so you just get this like really nice, crunchy golden brown top. All right, and then I'm gonna top each shortcake with a little bit of demerara sugar. If you don't want to use a different sugar, you can just use granulated. Okay, then just, it's partly aesthetic, but I just really like poppy seeds. There's something very kind of like, I don't know, homey.
Hipster.
You think it's hipster? Have poppy seeds on it? I think it just goes. Okay, these are ready to go into the oven. My rack is in the middle. I'm gonna go right in, and then they're gonna take 20 minutes or so, maybe a little longer. And I just wanna bake them until the tops and bottoms are like nice dark golden brown. So these are gonna bake for around 20, but I'll rotate at the 15 mark. I always like to go most of the way through before rotating because I don't ever wanna like disturb them when they're like in such a sort of semi-raw state. So rotate after 15. They might take a little more than 20, but we'll see. The shortcakes, I peeked through the oven door with the light on. They look so good. I'll rotate them in a couple minutes, but also at the same time, my poaching liquid is ready to strain. If you did a better job than I did of straining the pulp out of your orange juice, it's really not necessary, but I'm gonna strain it just in case there's any seeds or anything in there. So it has reduced to this like beautiful, really kind of almost like jewel tone syrup. And as you recall, there's a cup of sugar in the poaching liquid, plus there's some sugars from the wine and orange juice. So I'm not gonna use all of this. This is pretty sweet. This is just gonna be like a nice garnish over the shortcakes. It would be too much sugar to add all of it. I'm straining it into a mug because I'm out of glass measuring cups. So just strain it into something that can handle the heat. And it's very hot still, so it looks very liquid, but as it cools off, it will thicken and get more syrupy. So I can just set that aside. And then I'm gonna go ahead and rotate the shortcakes, which have been in for 14 minutes and change. Okay, those probably need another 5 minutes or so, 5 to 6. My timer just went off, so they were in for 21 minutes, I think. I'm gonna pull them out. They're nice and golden brown. Ooh, look how pretty they look. So nice and puffy. You can see the layers on the sides. You can see how nice and like tall and fluffy they got. I'm so excited. They look delicious. These obviously need to cool. While they're cooling, I'm gonna do the very final step of the recipe for assembly, which is to just whip together that 1 cup of mascarpone and 1.5 cups of remaining heavy cream. So I'm gonna do that, and then I'll show you how I assemble the shortcakes. It looks so pretty. I love how it kind of composes and comes together on a plate. My shortcakes are mostly cooled. I would say there's a little bit of warmth on the bottom, but we're gonna get the show on the road. So I'm gonna start to assemble. I have my beautiful whipped cream. Now this is actually a mixture of mascarpone and heavy cream. I like mascarpone for this because it adds a kind of density to the cream that I really want here. Like straight whipped heavy cream I love, but it is really, really light. And sometimes I like having like a little more sort of substance in there. Then of course I have my fruit and my syrup to drizzle on top. I'm just gonna plate 1. Obviously this recipe makes a lot. So I'm just gonna split. This is my favorite shortcake. Kind of got the tallest. You can see all those layers in there. It's really light for its size. Like it's not like I feel it and it's like feels like a baseball where it's like really heavy. So I'm just gonna split it. This one I can tell is sort of has a natural midpoint where I can split it, or you can use a knife to split it. I didn't really split evenly. Oh well. So here's the bottom half. I have a specific way of assembling this where I actually like the fruit to go here on the bottom. And that's because I like there to be a chance for the bottom of the shortcake to actually absorb the juices from the fruit. And what happens sometimes if you put cream on first and then fruit and juices is like the juices water down the cream a little bit and it kind of compromises that texture. So I go fruit first, but if you're making this at home, you could really assemble it any way that you prefer. So I'm going to take a spoonful of the fruit, just kind of arrange that on top. Let it fall however it wants to. See how the juices are already kind of absorbing into that fruitcake. Not fruitcake, that shortcake. Sorry. I'm really tired. Okay, so fruit. I'm gonna give it a drizzle of the syrup. So I did not sweeten the whipped cream. It's just the heavy cream and mascarpone, no sugar, because there's plenty of other sweetness elsewhere. Then a nice big dollop of cream. Frankly, could have whipped the cream a little less. Then the shortcake lid goes on top. I truly have no idea what it looks like on that side, but it looks pretty good from over here. The colors I think are so beautiful. I love that drizzle of syrup. The poppy seeds are like weirdly cheerful, and it's just such a beautiful composed dessert. So the rest of the shortcakes, fruit and cream, is for us to enjoy as a team later on, but I'm going to dig into this one right now. I just love how it looks. I love the color of the rhubarb. I love how cheerful the poppy seeds look and like the volume from the cream. It's just such a pretty dessert. Very feminine, I think. Okay, I'm gonna try it. The shortcake is so tender. The fork just like, there's no resistance. There's like that really subtle orange flavor from the zest. I just love the rhubarb texture. It is like soft and really tender, but you know that you're eating like a piece of rhubarb. The flavor is not lost at all. Really good sweet tart balance. It's seriously a dessert that kind of has everything. It has fruit, it has pastry, it has whipped cream. It's super tender. You get that kind of like flakiness and cakiness that I really like. It's really good, delicious. I feel like this is such a great dessert recipe. Honestly, you could have this like for brunch. It's not that sweet. It's like fruit and a biscuit basically. But I think it's a really beautiful dessert for kind of the early summer months, late spring, where maybe you're not at like peak summer fruit yet, but there's rhubarb, there's raspberries. You could make it all summer long with all of your favorite summer produce. So just so delicious. Thank you so much for watching. And I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. And don't forget to like and subscribe.